Hey guys, so we're wrapping up the budget Nova here, and it just sits too low in the front. I used some unknown coil springs that had been cut at one point, and I didn't realize how low and a little bit uneven they were going to be. Now it looks pretty good the way it sits, but the driver's side does sit a little bit lower than the passenger side. And even though it looks good the way it's sitting, the real problem is my control arms is so low, my control arms are all the way up, and my shocks are completely collapsed when I try to install them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out these used coil springs that have been cut and uneven apparently, and I'm going to install some brand new lowering springs. I'm going to be using BMR springs. There's the part number. I've had these for a while because they did not fit the control arms that I had. They will fit stock control arms, but they did not fit the control arms I had at the time, so I took them back out and put coilovers in. They'll fit a stock control arm just fine. So we're going to throw them in a budget Nova and hopefully maintain the front end being a little bit low, but not as low as it is, and have the control arms all jacked up so that the shocks really are ineffective. Let's get started. All right, so got the car jacked up. It's on jack stands. Got a jack under the lower control arm, and I've got my cotter pin out. Now I've got to take my nut loose. I'm going to leave the nut on there to protect the threads, and then since I don't have the separator tool that actually pushes down on the ball joint, I don't like the pickle forks, I'm going to hit this real hard with a hammer, and it's going to knock the ball joint out. All right, so I've got my jack right below the control arm, about 1.5 inches, 2 inches. That way I know when this is loose, it'll pop down. If you keep pressure on it, you might have this loose and you're beating on it for no reason. So I'm going to hit this, knock it loose, hopefully not hit the threads on this bolt or hit my castle nut here. Knock that loose, that'll drop down a little bit, and then we can slowly lower the control arm down and get the spring out. All right, so we're getting ready to let this down. Now you want to make sure that your end of your control arm does not get caught on your backing plate. So you need to maybe pull up on the upper control arm some and pull this out, let the ball joint swivel over, and then that should give you enough room to get this down. So hopefully we got it in place. All right, so typically with a stock length spring that hasn't been cut like this one has, this is going to have a lot more pressure on it, and you're going to need to use a spring compressor to get this thing compressed enough to get it out, because all the pressure is off of the jack, but my control arm won't go down any farther. The spring still has tension on it, but it doesn't have so much that I shouldn't be able to pry it out and not tear it up or tear me up. That wasn't so bad. All right, so you can see the difference in these springs. Now, this is the one that was in there. It's a much, much smaller spring, maybe a 6-cylinder spring, and it may not be cut. It may just be a really weak spring. These are much, much stiffer springs, but they're probably not going to compress anywhere near as much. So I should have about the same ride height, or maybe I'm hoping I have a little bit better ride height. There's only one way to find out. Now it's important when you're changing springs, if you've got factory control arms with the cup in the bottom, you want to make sure that the very tip of the spring is actually sitting down in the indent, which you can see the end of the spring right in there, and it's sitting down in the indentation that's in the bottom of this arm. All right, so let's jack it up a little bit, make sure we're off the jack stands. Gonna pull those out. Then we can let it down. Might have to roll it back and forth a little bit. Because when you have these cars up in the air, when you let it back down, the tires grab and they don't want to let the front end sit where it's gonna be. So I can hear my springs kind of pop into place. At least it's even now. Let's see if we can, and it still needs an alignment. There we go. That's much better than before. Before they would just move an inch. So let's roll the car forward and backwards and see how it's going to look. All right, so you can see it is up a little bit on the front, not much. Still has a very good stance to it, in my opinion. But it might settle down a little bit more. What I'm going to do is I'm going to roll the car forward and let the suspension settle out, then roll it backwards. Make sure sometimes you got to roll it 10 or 15 feet to let the tires set back where they're going to be. So let's do that real quick and then see how it's going to look. Instead of pushing it, I'll just crank it up. How about that? All right, I'm really liking that. I think it looks great. I think that's a really good stance. Very happy with it. And it's even across the front now, which it was not before. So it's going to make it easier to align, easier to get the shocks in. And my control arms are now at a much better angle. All right, so this was pretty quick and easy spring change. Now, what made it easy for me and pretty quick was these springs that I took out were low tension and they were already cut, I think. So they were pretty easy to get out. I did not need to use a spring compressor. Now, also, I didn't have shocks in there yet because I couldn't put them in because they were bottomed out. Now, I've got more room now, so that won't be a problem. And I'm not going to show you putting in shocks in this video because it's just putting in shocks. There's nothing special about it. Now, it did raise this thing up about 2 inches, which is a huge difference in the angle of the control arms, which is what I needed basically to get the shocks to where they'll actually function instead of being bottomed out. Before, I could not push the driver's side down at all. It might move a ½ inch and it would bottom out. And now I've got plenty of room to push this car around and suspension travel. So now I've got plenty of suspension travel. Without it bottoming out on both sides. So that's way better. Now, if you've got stock V8 springs in there or whatever springs you've got, if they're stiff, probably going to need a spring compressor, and those things are a pain in the butt, but that's how it is now. These things, like I said, they shouldn't normally lower a car. If you've got stock springs in there, the BMR springs that I put in, that part number, should normally lower the car about 2 inches. And it's a little bit stiffer spring than factory, so it's, you know, probably not great for drag racing, but it's good for handling. Anyway, we'll see you guys next time.